How's the hangar coming? Coming along? Good. Good. Looks great. I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah. You too. I'm going to go ahead and call this October 7, 2019 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. We'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. And actually, Corey, do you mind leading us tonight in the pledge? Lead us tonight in the pledge, please. Thanks, Corey. We'll move on to item 3 of our agenda, which is our communications from the public. We do have 3 public hearings scheduled for this evening, so if you're here to speak on one of those public hearings, please wait until I call that individual hearing. Otherwise, if you have anything to bring to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity, and your name and address when you approach the podium, please.
Hello, Council. My name is Paul Archie. I'm at 600 East 8th Street. And I'm encouraging you to reconsider a regulation that was passed, maybe while you were on the council, maybe not, in 2012, banning medical cannabis businesses within the city limits of Whitefish. And I think at the time it was probably, hey, let's wait and see how the regulations work out. What's this going to look like? We don't know what to do, so let's just not let anything happen. And since then, Montana has adjusted its regulatory framework, has new rules coming on board in June, and there's even the potential that next year it could be fully legal due to ballot initiatives that are being signed right now. So I would encourage you to be ahead of the game rather than behind the game and reconsider that regulation. That's it.
Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Who's next?
Good evening, Catherine Seaman.
I'm Bob Seaman, and our local resident, our son, Corey Seaman, who's lived here for quite a while, and our other son lives here also. We're relatively new to town. We just moved up here to be with our boys. We left a beautiful place in northern Wisconsin on a chain of lakes, and we've always admired your town and how beautiful it is in the water, so we bought a place on the water. So we're standing here because when we bought the house, it was for sale by owner, and we realized it was 50 feet of frontage, but we didn't know that we had restrictions for docks and hoists and rail systems, et cetera, which we're used to having boat hoists. And so we're up here because our property comes with a grandfathered rail system, which is totally disrepair, but we got rid of quite a bit of it just because we didn't want it in the water, and we wanted to look nice and have the shore be as pristine as possible. And the little boathouse is still there. But we have the opportunity, I guess, to put up another rail system, which we have an issue with in that they're not very safe. They don't stay in adjustment. Boats fall off them, cables snap, and all the other stuff that goes with them. So what we'd like to do is not rebuild that and put a single boat hoist next to our dock without a canopy on it, so that it's not intrusive to anybody. So what we find also is when it's really windy, the boat is trying to shove the dock sideways, which it does move, and there's lots of boats up and down. So if it ever got loose, it's a hazard that way. The other thing with a rail system, if you have kids, grandkids, for instance, in the water around that, they're just a little spooky, and they're also a much bigger footprint in the water. Rail systems have a series, as you know, of feet, where a hoist is 4 feet, pick it up, put it on shore. So, and we were not here for the meeting before. We desperately were trying to get our driver's licenses in Polson and voters' licenses, and they were about 6 hours late as they did this. So we fully planned to be here, so that was a question on our notes, that why weren't we here to discuss this with you on that meeting? So we apologize for that reason. So at any rate, we have talked to Bailey a little bit about it, and we're asking for a small variance to put a hoist in and not rebuild this rail system as we mentioned. And
If I may, I also wanted to add, we're very good stewards of the water. I was on the waterfront. I was a volunteer in Three Lakes, Wisconsin, did a lot of work for invasive species, and like to be on the water quite a bit in our kayak float boat. Keeping our waters pristine and clean is our objective. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Will you be around for our deliberations on this agenda item? Okay, so if so, we may call you back up if we have any questions.
No, this evening?
Yes,
Yes, we'll be here.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Further public comment tonight? Further communications? Not seeing any, we will stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Richard?
Bike Ped met this morning, and our the mayor graced us with his presence. But there was a discussion on the Riverbend condos easement, which is ongoing, and that occupied most of the morning.
Thanks, Richard. Katie?
The LLAC, the Legacy Lands Advisory Committee, actually met in September, and they will be coming before us in November with a various amount of conservation easements that they'll bring before council in efforts to help close the loop and work on securing the trail to close the loop. And then moving forward, Legacy Lands and Whitefish Legacy Partners will be continuing to work to educate the public on their push to acquire the 480 acres around Smith Lake for public rec use and conservation easements. So as things develop, I may be giving you more information. So stay tuned, or if you have any questions, you can contact Whitefish Legacy Partners as well.
Thanks, Katie. Further volunteer board reports from the council? Not seeing any, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the September 16th meeting minutes, or can I have a motion for approval? Richard?
I'll go ahead and make that motion.
Is there a second to the motion? Second. Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously, Michelle, which brings us quickly on to our first public hearing of the night, item 6A, which is a consideration of a request from Matt Danford for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment located at 1047 Columbia Avenue, the property zone WR2, which is our two-family residential. Bailey?
Good evening. So the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment above a proposed two-car garage. The property is currently developed with an existing single-family dwelling and some associated accessory buildings. The structure would be over an oversized two-car garage, but the accessory apartment on the second floor does have to be 600 square feet or less, so that's the part that we would be looking at. The building would be required to meet all setback, size, and height requirements, and will access off of a shared driveway easement that's on the south side of the property. The property is almost 14,000 square feet in size. It's 13,800 and some change. It is surrounded by residential uses on all sides. It's zone WR2, which is our two-family limited residential district. And the growth policy designation for the area is urban, which does correspond to the WR2 zoning as well. We did mail a notice to adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the parcel on August 28th. We also emailed advisory agencies and placed a legal on the pilot, and I've had no comments received on the project at all. So just going over the criteria for consideration of a conditional use permit. The proposal is consistent with the purpose and intent of the regulations. As you all are aware, there are performance standards for accessory apartments, and the proposal does appear to meet all of those requirements. It will be accessory to a single family home, and adequate parking will be required. Again, the apartment has to meet or exceed setbacks required for a primary structure, as the footprint of the garage will be bigger than the 600. The apartment won't be bigger than 600, but just the general footprint, and therefore it has to meet the standard setbacks. There's no reduction in setbacks for them. And those standards will be confirmed at the time of building permit review. As I said, the property accesses from a shared private driveway easement that's on the southern side of the property that accesses onto Columbia Avenue. And Columbia Avenue is a publicly maintained roadway, so there is adequate access to the subject property. The zoning regulations requires 2 parking spaces for the single-family dwelling unit and then 1 additional off-street space provided for the accessory apartment. The lot does have adequate space to accommodate all the parking needs on site within the proposed garage and then additional room adjacent to the garage. Portions of the driveway are already paved, but just so the applicant is aware and everyone's aware, the first 80 feet of the driveway is required to be paved. So I do believe they've met all of their paving requirements, but that would be something that would need to be looked at the time of building permit as well. The subject property is currently served by water and sewer. Water and sewer is also reviewed at the time of building permit. Stormwater drainage is also reviewed at the time of building permit by the Public Works Department. Traffic impacts are anticipated to be minimal since it is already a single-family residence. It's located within a neighborhood with existing uses. It shouldn't result in a significant impact onto Columbia Avenue. As I said, the apartment will be required to meet lot coverage and height standards in the zoning regulations. It will be similar to existing adjacent residential uses in the area and must comply with those primary structure setbacks. The proposed use is not expected to impact or change the character of the existing neighborhood, and the density is not out of character with this area as well. So staff is recommending approval of the application subject to 12 conditions in the staff report. The planning board met on September 19th and considered the request. There were no members of the public that spoke at the meeting, and those draft minutes were attached as part of your packet for your review. And following the hearing, the planning board unanimously recommended approval of the request. So I'm happy to answer questions if you have, and the site plan's up for you guys to see if you have questions.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on her staff report? Any questions at this time? Not seeing any, Bailey, thanks. Is the applicant or applicant's representative here? Do you have anything to add to the staff report? Don't have to. Okay. With that said, we did advertise for a public hearing on item 6A, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony on this item? Any public comments? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Katie.
I would move to approve WCUP 19-16, the findings of fact in the staff report and the 11 conditions of approval as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board, September 19th, 2019.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennan.
You said 11? I think there are 12 conditions. Katie is all.
The proposed motion, I will,
There are 12 conditions.
12, excuse me. Sorry, there's 12.
That's okay with the second?
That's fine.
Further discussion on the motion? Sorry. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, Michelle, which quickly brings us on to item 6B, which is a consideration of a request from the Whitefish Christian Academy for a conditional use permit to add onto their existing school, which is located at 820 Asher Avenue. The property is zoned WR1, which is R1 family residential. And the Whitefish growth policy does designate this property as urban. Wendy.
Right, good evening. Just as a little background, back in 2014, the City Council granted approval to the Christian Academy to install 2 temporary classrooms located to the west of the school. They were planning on rebuilding in some off-site location and just needed some temporary classrooms until they were able to get their finances in order for that. The building official was comfortable allowing their usage for up to 4 years, and then in the fall of 2015 is when they actually got put into place. Since that time, they've been working towards expanding their school, but have determined that this site is actually the best location instead of some off-site location. And so that 4-year expiration is now. So this current request is to expand the existing school by about 11,000 square feet. They'll have classrooms, administration, bathroom area, auditorium, and a cafeteria located at the 820 Asher. The site plan, which is up on the screen there for you, has some revisions to the access. The entrance will be off of East 8th Street, which is to the north of the parking lot, and they'll close the north entrance off of Asher Avenue. And then the exit will still remain off of Asher Avenue. They're proposing a couple of expanded parking areas, one to the west of the building, off of East 8th Street, and then to the west of the existing parking area right now. The temporary classrooms would also be removed as part of this project. A CUP is required for schools in the WR1. Again, it's at 820 Asher, and it's a little more than 3 acres. And the property is currently developed as a school, zone WR1, with an urban growth policy designation. All public services and facilities are available. The applicant twice postponed their matter at planning board, so we did 3 public notices in both the legal and adjacent advisory agencies and the neighbors. We did receive some comments, which are included in your packet, including concerns for the location of the storm pond, increased usage of East 8th Street, some non-compliant outdoor lighting, which has since been brought into compliance. They've changed those lights. And then how the current road is configured at East 8th Street and how it's not really functioning well as it hits over towards Park Avenue. We do review conditional use permits according to the criteria in the zoning regulations. It does comply with the growth policy. All the zoning regulations can be met and will be confirmed at the time of building permit. The site is suitable. There's adequate land area, including emergency access, which will be reviewed by the fire marshal at the time of building permit. The amount of parking meets all of our standards in the layout. There's some parking currently, hard to see, but they have some parking on the north side of the building, and that will be removed as part of this project when they fix East 8th Street. The traffic circulation is going to change a little bit with the new configuration, with the new parking area and the upgrades to East 8th Street as well. Currently, East 8th Street is a one-way to the west from Asher Avenue over to Park Avenue. And it's about a 12-foot wide road. And this has caused some confusion. People are going the wrong way. And then when you exit towards the west, you end up on the south side of East 8th, right in front of the daycare. So the city has painted some stripes on that road to direct cars to the proper side of the road. Again, let's see. So also, due to the increased usage of East 8th Street, the Public Works Department is requesting East 8th be upgraded to a local street section, which is a 2-way street with curb and gutter on both sides. This will also include a sidewalk and boulevard on one side of the road. It will require some additional right-of-way on the west because the right-of-way width is inadequate. Also, Public Works is requesting additional information on traffic impacts. It doesn't need to be a full TIS that we typically see because they aren't going to generate that much more additional traffic, but it should be prepared by a professional to look at existing conditions, the additional trips generated by the project impact on the current roadway and intersections. Water and sewer are available. They'll need to do a professional stormwater plan because they're adding more than 5,000 square feet of impervious area. Again, East 8th Street was paved by Public Works a couple of years ago, and it's only 12 feet wide. So again, it'll be a regular street section through there. This project will have to go to the Architectural Review Committee to review community compatibility and mass and scaling. The neighborhood currently is a mixture of schools, daycares, a residential, and a church. The Planning Board held a public hearing on September 19th, and they did recommend approval. The Planning Board added 3 conditions of approval. Condition number 10 to include sufficient bike racks. Condition number 11 to include street trees in the boulevard on East 8th Street. And condition number 12 to include street lighting on East 8th Street. Just for kind of the way the conditions are organized, I would suggest that 11 and 12 be made a part of condition 7A, which is the street section. So I've made that suggestion in my transmittal on page 107. And then because of the kind of delays in getting this project to planning board, the Christian Academy was looking at their scheduling and is anticipating that they'll probably be able to do their infrastructure this next summer. But in order to not conflict with the school schedule, they've requested that the temporary classrooms be extended out for 1 more year until 2021. We did review this with the building official, and he was comfortable knowing that they're moving forward. And then finally, under streetlights and street trees, staff is supportive of the planning board recommendation to include street trees. However, we recommend that the streetlights be part of a future phase of the road development and recommend the council strike that requirement for streetlights. We do recommend the installation of conduit in anticipation of future street lighting. So just to hit some of the highlights of some of the other conditions of approval. Again, that the permit would be valid for 18 months. We'd like to see a traffic memo submitted to Public Works. They'll have to dedicate some additional right-of-way along the road on the west side in order to make the road improvements, upgrade the road to a local street section. All the rest is just sort of standard conditions.
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy? Richard?
Wendy, you started by saying to include conditions 11 and 12 in 7A, and at the same time, though, you're saying we should eliminate condition 12.
Right.
So your recommendation is to only include 11,
Right.
condition 11 in 7A.
Correct. Just the street trees and then conduit, street lighting conduit.
To include the conduit. Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Further questions for Wendy? Frank?
Why not put the lights in? We have done it every other place, much to my irritation. Why? Why now? Why here?
I think I'll let Craig.
We've been listening, Frank.
I doubt that you've not demonstrated to this day.
Typically, when when a project requires a new roadway be built, or if the city is reconstructing a roadway, we include lighting. Normally, the city projects come with a fairly robust public outreach process where we go through public meetings to talk about what people want to see with certain projects. And so oftentimes streetlights, or more often than not, the streetlights are one of the most contested or requested portions of the project. On a project like this, where it's an existing road and there's been no public outreach, traditionally, we see some backlash in new lighting, and so our recommendation from Public Works is that we put the conduit in so that at a future phase, whether this be a resort tax project or by public request, the lighting can go in the future.
Thank you.
Satisfied?
I prefer no further comment. It makes no sense.
Further questions for staff? Craig, is this a heavily utilized travel corridor for children in the evenings in particular?
Not in the evenings.
Especially
It's-
with
I mean,
no
obviously,
sidewalk.
it's in the Whitefish, it's in the school district area, and so it's traveled considerably during drop-off and pickup times, for not only the Christian Academy, but, the high school and
Muldown.
the elementary school. I don't believe it's heavily utilized in the evenings or early mornings.
Okay. Richard?
Could I ask Bridger a question? And wintertime, in your opinion, would street lighting add a degree of safety to that roadway for children, particularly before school when it's still dark?
I would agree with that, yes.
You would?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Bridger. Any further questions or comments for staff? We did advertise for a public hearing on item 6B, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Doug, do you have anything else to add on behalf of the applicant? Name and address for the record as you know.
Doug Petmeyer, TD&H Engineering, 450 Corporate Drive, Kalispell. I'll just speak to a couple of comments that did come up during planning board. One was the storm drain detention and having a pond, and we would not do that with the school facility. So I think that answered the questions and concerns with that. Other than that, we agree with the findings of fact from staff. We did meet early on with staff to start developing what would be required. This is gonna be a big chunk of change for the school to swallow with 8th Street, but they understand that. That's one of the reasons they're asking for the extension on when these improvements might get, finished. It's one thing to raise funds for a school. It's a little harder to raise it for asphalt and curbs, but we also understand, this part of town is extremely hard to get around. Yeah, I guess I'm here if you guys have any other questions. Richard?
Do you want to comment on the lighting issue?
Yeah,
Because it came up in
yeah,
planning board.
Like I said, when we met with staff, we were trying to look for some areas maybe that we could save some potential future costs. It makes sense to put in the conduit so that when the lights are, needed, you don't go back and rip up the street and that kind of stuff. But I think what we were trying to do is look for, that was one of the reasons we have sidewalk on one side of the street as well. Just trying to make, the street function better, but also maybe trying to limit some of those costs that are gonna have to come up with by the Christian Academy.
How many streetlights would it be? At what cost?
I would guess 3, Craig? 4?
150 feet or so in
Yeah.
between.
So
It's
probably
a 600-foot road segment.
to
so
4?
4,
I think 4
That
is.
probably depends on what bid tabs you look at. $6,000 to $7,000, I bet, a streetlight installed
Per streetlight?
Yeah,
per
that's correct.
streetlight. So it's a sizable chunk of change, but
further questions for Doug? Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Ed.
Appreciate the input. Any public testimony this evening on this item? Any public comments? Go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion or discussion. But I would prefer a motion one way or another, just to keep the dialogue moving forward. Melissa.
I'll move to approve the request from the Whitefish Christian Academy for a conditional use permit to add onto their existing school located at 820 Asher Avenue, Zone WR1. Does that cover it? Sorry.
It does, with the clarification that we will combine condition number 11 with 7A and strike 12. Is that correct? That was your recommendation, Wendy? Is that
Yes.
inherent to your motion? Is there a second to the motion?
I have a second. May I also ask, do we need to include conduit addition in that? Yes.
Let's
Okay.
act on the original motion first. So the motion has been seconded. Now, if you'd like to do a friendly amendment, we can go ahead and do so. Katie?
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to add on to condition 7A to also say that conduit should be extended into the area for future streetlights.
Is there a second to the friendly amendment?
I'll second.
Seconded by Counselor Hartman. We will vote on the friendly amendment first, which will be added to condition number 7A. Richard, any comments?
No.
All those in favor, please raise your hand on the friendly amendment. All those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Richard?
So we can discuss it. I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to include the requisite number of streetlights to connect to that conduit, thus approximately 4 streetlights.
Is there a second to what will be friendly condition number 12 to include the required requisite number of streetlights given a 600-foot road segment?
Second.
Seconded by Counselor Sweeney. Discussion.
Yeah, I understand the need to save money wherever possible. But I also think that at certain times of the year, particularly in the depths of winter around here, the street lighting for public safety, particularly those of our children, I think is important. And that's why I would add this. It is one of those things that came up at planning board as well. And so I want to toss that out there.
Thanks, Richard. Frank?
Further connection with that, Craig, When would 8th Street or East 8th Street be on, if it is even on the resort tax list of streets to be reconfigured?
It's quite a ways down the list. I believe in the most recent list that was presented to the Resort Tax Committee, it was number 21 on the list.
Thank you.
Is there further discussion on what will be friendly amendment, which will add condition number 12 requiring streetlights? We'll vote on the friendly amendment now. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that does carry unanimously. Michelle, which brings us on to our original motion for approval as conditioned. Is there further discussion?
Yeah, further, just a clarification, do we want to include 12 with 7A or standalone?
With 7A.
I mean, 7A.
That will be included with 7A.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion?
Do we then need to strike the conduit verbiage that was added as a friendly?
Sure. I mean, is that okay with the second? It's kind of implied.
Yeah.
Street light, no wire.
Wendy?
About changing condition number 8 to extend the temporary classrooms out to 2021.
Okay, we will need a motion to that effect, just modifying condition number 8.
I would move to modify condition number 8 to extend the use of temporary classrooms to 2021.
Is there a second to the friendly amendment?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennon. I don't believe we need a motion on that friendly amendment to the condition. We can just include that as part of the final motion on the original motion. All those in favor of the original motion as amended, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously as well. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate your time tonight. Thanks, Craig. We'll move on to item 6C, which is a consideration of a request from Cortland Kelmo, who is here in attendance this evening, for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment located at 725 Riverside Avenue. The property is zoned WR2, which again is our two-family residential. Billy.
So this is a request for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment above an existing garage. The property is currently developed with a single-family residence, and the accessory apartment would be located above an existing two-car garage, which is located at the side of the subject property. I realize my site plan, or the one in the packet, is turned a little bit, so sorry about that. North is actually that way. So it works. The property and the buildings were surveyed in 2014 and does comply with all setback requirements. The structure accesses directly onto Columbia Avenue along the east side of the subject property. The property is a little over 32,000 square feet. It's a relatively large lot in this area. It is surrounded by residential uses on the majority of the sides. The south side does have the Whitefish River, and then commercial on the other side of the river. The property is zoned WR2, which is our two-family residential district, and the growth policy designation for the area is urban, which does correspond to the WR2 as well. So we did mail notice to adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the property on August 28th. We also emailed advisory agencies and placed a legal in the paper, and I've had no comments that have been received on the project. Just going over the criteria for consideration of a conditional use permit. Again, the development proposal is consistent with the purpose and intent of the regulations. As I mentioned previously on the other one, there are special performance standards required for an accessory apartment, and this project does appear to meet all of those requirements. The accessory apartment will meet or exceed the setbacks required for a primary structure, as the footprint of the existing garage, again, is over that 600 square feet. So the apartment is required to be at 600, but the building itself, the footprint is bigger than that, and therefore doesn't get that reduction to the side setback requirements. And these standards would be confirmed at the time of building permit as well. The property does also comply with the minimum lot size and lot width requirements. So as I said, the existing garage currently accesses directly off of Columbia Avenue on the east side of the property, and Columbia Avenue is a publicly maintained roadway, so there is adequate access to the property. The zoning regulations requires 2 parking spaces for the single-family dwelling unit and 1 space provided for the accessory apartment. The lot does provide adequate space to accommodate all parking needs on site. Within the proposed garage, there's additional room next to the existing driveway, and then they also have a driveway which is off of Riverside, which is on the north side. So they actually have 2 access just for their property. The property is currently served by water and sewer, and those connections will be reviewed by Public Works at the time of building permit. Also, stormwater drainage will be reviewed by the Public Works Department at the time of the building permit application. Traffic impacts are anticipated to be minimal since it does currently have a single-family residence and it's located within an existing neighborhood with similar uses. The apartment should not result in a significant impact to traffic on Columbia Avenue or Riverside Avenue. The property does meet, or the apartment will be required to meet the lot coverage and height standards of the WR2 zoning. And again, the apartment on the second floor is required to be 600 square feet or less, which would actually reduce the overall mass of the building. The proposed use is not expected to impact or change the character of the neighborhood, and the density is not out of character with the area as well. So, staff recommended approval of the application subject to 12 conditions. The planning board met on September 19th and considered the request. There were no members of the public that spoke at the meeting, and those draft minutes were attached as part of your packet. Following the hearing, the planning board did unanimously recommend approval of the request. And I would like to note, again, I have my typo, the same one on proposed motion. It's not 11 conditions, it's 12 conditions that we're proposing, so just as a note there. And then the one other condition that I would like to point out, that this one, condition 6, the existing driveway and any new parking areas must be paved. The existing driveway is gravel, so they do have to meet that first 80 feet requirement for that in front of the accessory apartment. So, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on this agenda item? Any questions for Bailey? Not seeing any.
Okay.
Thanks, Bailey. Anything to add as the applicants? Okay, thanks, Cortland. With that said, we will take public comment now on item 6C. Is there any public testimony this evening? Any public testimony? Not seeing any. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Ryan.
I move to approve a request from Cortland Kelmo for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment at 725 Riverside Avenue, zoned WR2, 2-family residential, WCUP 19-17.
Thank you, Ryan. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion, comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously as well, Michelle. Thanks, Cortland. Yep, have a good night. We will move on to item 7, communications from Dave Taylor, our planning and building director, and we'll take item A first, which is consideration of a request from Robert and Catherine Seaman for a minor Whitefish Lakeshore variance to reduce the required side setback for installation of a shore station without a canopy within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. And again, the property is located at 1716 West Lakeshore Drive, and the applicants are in attendance this evening and testified prior to our public hearings. Bailey.
Okay, so just kind of go over the project. So this is a minor variance request to reduce the required side setback for the installation of a shore station without a canopy. The shore station is approximately 10.5 feet wide by 12 feet long. As the applicant stated earlier, they're proposing to install it on the northwestern side of the dock to better protect the boat and the dock due to the prevailing wind directions. There is a partially dismantled grandfathered rail system that's located on the opposite side of the dock, which does also limit some navigability of the property. In order to install the shore station on the proposed side of the dock, they're requesting a minor variance due to the regulations. They require minimum of 25 feet from a side riparian boundary for shore stations or floating boat lifts. Since the property is only 50 feet wide and the required distance is 25 feet, they would not be able to install a shore station on either side of the dock in compliance with the regulations. With the existing permitted dock located in the center of the property, which is our requirement under the lakeshore regulations, we say it needs to be placed in the center for maximum safety from the side property lines. Just with the dock width itself, there's only a distance of 21 feet from the dock side to the side property line. So the proposed shore station would reduce the side setback on one side down to about 11 feet, if approved. Since they're not proposing a canopy on the shore station, there would be no change to the total constructed area of the property. And I'll get into that here in just a second. Just kind of some history of the property. The most recent permit from 2016 was to replace an existing retaining wall. It was never completed and the permit actually expired. Prior to that, in 2015, there was a permit that was approved to remove a portion of the grandfathered boathouse and restore that area with gravel and stacked rock. And this permit actually made the old boathouse no longer usable. It basically shrunk it down. I think it just actually has their well or the pump for their water system was basically what they were doing. So it's not actually usable. It's not big enough to store a boat or anything like that with it as well. Prior to that, the property was issued a permit for the existing dock in 2007, but it was conditioned to be no larger than 320 square feet. At that time in 2007, the property already exceeded the allowable constructed area for their, based off their lakeshore frontage. And so an exact replacement was granted for the dock that had been there previously. So they were allowed to put exactly there. So they were already over that constructed area at that time. They currently are at 545 square feet, and that exceeds that allowance by 145 square feet. So that's why they're not allowed to put a canopy on, and they're not proposing one, because that would actually increase more. They'd have to ask for another variance. So they're not doing that. In reviewing the minor variance, there's 4 criteria that have to be met. The first one is the unusual circumstances create a strict enforcement that results in a hardship. As I said, they only have 50 feet of lakeshore frontage. The regulations do realize that there are properties with limited frontage, and there's actually a table that's at the front of the lakeshore regulations for reduced setbacks for properties with limited lakeshore frontage, but that only applies if there's no specific section or setback other places in the regulation. So under the shore station setbacks, those are more restrictive and those apply more than this one. So if there wasn't a setback under the shore station regulations, they'd actually only be required to have a 10-foot side property line setback. And so right now with the shore station proposed, they're looking at about 11 feet. Additionally, the shore station or dock cannot be moved further towards the southern property line because, again, that old rail system, which is damaged in the lake. And then, so strict enforcement does result in a hardship. They have no way of complying with either the dock standards or the shore station setback standards. And just as a note, the docks generally have to have a 20-foot setback. So just putting in perspective the differences in distance required. And rail systems also require a 25-foot setback. So even if the rail system could be utilized, it can't fit there either. It'd be grandfathered or non-conforming as well. No reasonable alternatives exist. I kind of have gone over that as well. There's no alternatives that comply with the standards based off of their lakeshore frontage. The proposal would not materially diminish water quality, diminish water quality, diminish fish or wildlife habitat, create a public nuisance or a safety hazard. It's not going to alter the characteristics of the shoreline, and they're requesting the proposal to help maintain the existing shoreline and minimize any potential impacts from the lake. Let me go here. So staff recommended approval of the application subject to 11 conditions that are in my staff report. The Whitefish Lakeshore Protection Committee met on September 11th and considered the request, and those draft minutes were attached as part of your packet. Following the meeting, the committee did vote to recommend denial of the application on a 4-1 vote. Since they requested denial, I had them actually state for the record what their reasons were for denial, and those are included in the minutes as part of your packet. So there is actually a finding for why they're recommending denial. Following the meeting, the applicant did submit an email to staff addressing all of the committee's comments and concerns. That email was included as part of your packet as well. If you choose to deny the applicant's request, then I have included a draft finding of fact based off of the Lakeshore Committee's discussion at the meeting for their recommendation of denial. But I'm sure the applicant would love to talk with you guys more if you have questions and help answer. So I've actually have a proposed motion for denial and a proposed motion for approval. So not confusing at all.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey? I do as well. Go ahead, Richard.
Bailey, if, given the current condition of the boathouse, pump house, and the rail, attendant rail system, which appears to be in disrepair,
Yeah, it's for sure in the water.
unusable, is it in such a condition that even if they applied to rebuild it under any kind of a grandfather condition, would that even be permitted at this point? Or is that too big of a?
So the boathouse, we do not allow boathouses to be,
Right.
I mean, it's gone. They had a permit to reduce it down. I mean, it would take a huge, in my opinion, it would be a huge variance request to allow them to do that, because we do not allow any new boathouses to be built on the lake. The rail system, again, would require a variance because it's like half built. There's some in the water, but it doesn't connect all the way up. And again, rail systems require a 25-foot wide setback as well. So either way, they'd have to get a variance for the setback. They'd have to get a variance to reconstruct it, which we don't allow reconstruction in there as well. So, I mean, generally, this was the lesser of all kind of the requests that they could do.
Okay,
So.
thanks.
Other questions for Bailey? Frank, go ahead.
Was there any comment from the neighbor that they would be offended by having this hoist system?
So that's what's interesting about the Lakeshore regulations. The Lakeshore regulations does not do any public notice of variance requests or permits other than the agendas that are placed on the website and the council. And that's, as far as I know, that's how the regulations were set up, and it's never been changed. So we don't do any public noticing to the neighbors. And something that
Interesting.
yes. I would say that maybe the only time would be a major Lakeshore variance, like the dredging at Lazy Bay, because that went to Planning Board. Planning Board has a separate public notice. So that's probably the one issue I would say that's a little different, just because it goes through a different process than minors and regulars.
Okay. Further questions? So I have a couple comments, questions as well. So you're aware I spent about 9 years on the Lakeshore Protection Committee, several of which as vice chairman years ago. And I was trying to recall when we've considered the fact that a property owner is purchasing a narrow lot measuring 50 feet in this example as meeting a hardship test. And I could not recall an example in my tenure on that committee where we granted hardship given the fact, or for a narrower lot with the owner knowingly aware that when they purchased the lot, it was a narrow lot. And there would be certain constraints and restrictions to what they're able to do. And in the 20 years plus that the Lakeshore regulations have been in place, the setbacks have never changed.
Not that
The
I won't
riparian
either.
setbacks, that's for sure. So, my concern remains notably now, especially with the fact that, we're now reducing that setback to the adjacent property by a mere 11 and a half feet. And I think part of the criteria within the Lakeshore regulations is not only to protect water quality and the aesthetic appeal of the lake, but also to protect individuals' property rights from adjacent developments. When I look at variance criteria number 2, where no reasonable alternatives exist. I do recall in my tenure, and I verified this today with some former and existing members of the Lakeshore Committee, that many lakefront homeowners utilize mooring whips as a method to secure boats, and a lot of these mooring whips around the lake have withstood major storm surges without any damage to boats or docks. So I read the staff report. I know that there are reasonable alternatives to mitigate the impacts these folks are having on their property. And I also know that these have been used in other areas of the lake where the lake bed isn't suitable for anchoring or securing a shore station itself. So I know that there's been years and years of precedent to that effect. We seem to have a reasonable alternative, and I would just like you to comment on
I would
these
let the
items, please.
applicant comment on that. I
Okay.
don't, that's their case to do that,
Okay.
so. But I do love knowing that you have the history on the lake, because it helps me not having that history, so. If there's any other questions, otherwise I'll let the applicants
Okay.
come up. If you.
Any further questions for Bailey? Thanks, Bailey.
In reference to the rail system, we have had parts of it removed since it was an eyesore to start with, and with no real intention of wanting to rebuild it due to the safety factors that I mentioned before, and that we're so accustomed to using shore stations where we came from, and that they're safe and they're not an eyesore. Our neighbors do have a whip system, but this is a pontoon boat, and putting a pontoon boat on a whip system with the wind that we get would be risky. I was very surprised when the first big windstorm came up and I saw the boat trying to climb on the dock, which was, I was concerned for our boat, but I was concerned for all the other boats next to us and our neighbors. And to me, having grown up with boats, there's room to bring a boat in, and actually we would prefer to put it on the other side of the dock, actually, if it was on a shore station, which actually would help the dock not move so far, because the dock does swing quite a bit. So to us, to me and us, it's the real only alternative for our boat other than being tied to the dock, which then the whole thing it moves 15 or 20 degrees when it's windy. So the boat's next to us, and again, we were sold this property directly from the owner, knowing it's 50 feet, but not knowing that we were thinking, oh, we can add to the dock a little and put a piece out there to sit on, et cetera. And, do a little to it and add a station for it, for the boat. So we were really unaware of that. So this is why we're here. We're not trying to set a precedent or break a precedent. We're asking, and there is room, because there is a boat next to us that's on a whip system, but it's a small runabout. When you get the wind blowing to the side of a pontoon boat, it's quite a different story. So, and again, the rail system, yeah, if we were even allowed to put it up, I don't think we'd want to endeavor in that, because it looks like a jungle gym up on shore when they take it out, which is pretty ugly. They're very hard to put in and out and adjust. They come out of adjustment. We have good friends that have had them next to us, and they're constantly complaining. So I guess that's the best I can put it, but it would be the lowest impact, and we wouldn't get something that's monstrous to put out there that would be an eyesore in any way. So that's why, unless you've got something to add. Do you have a question?
Any questions for the applicants? Thanks for the explanation, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Catherine? Frank?
And you have a restriction on one side of the dock of where you want to put it. Do you not, if you wanted to put it on the other side of the dock?
If in fact it was a recommendation, and we could, I mean, it's actually shallower on the right side looking out, so there's a shallower spot. So the legs of the shore station would be shorter. It's doable on the left side facing out. The right side would be maybe preferable because it's downwind from the dock also. Who knows, either side, like you mentioned, it's in the middle, the dock is.
Right?
we'd go on a recommendation if that was something that was helpful.
Does-
The rail system's on the right.
But moving it from one side of the dock to the other wouldn't reduce the setback encroachment.
That was my
Because the
question.
dock's
So it
centered.
doesn't affect, you're gonna encroach, whatever side you would be encroaching on the setback.
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
why we're requesting
The variance.
it's not a big
Right.
variance according to,
One question too, as well as with these systems, the bunks sit between the actual pontoons, so there's no, it does not sit on the exterior of the pontoon. So theoretically, if you do have a pontoon boat sitting on a dock, to have some sort of a hoist, a pontoon hoist, the bunks go up between the actual two pontoons, so it really doesn't add anything, especially with no canopy. There's nothing that it's on the outside of the actual pontoon boat. So once again, between the two pontoons, lift straight up, and all you do is just have your spindle right there. So it's extremely low impact, and we did not know about the rail system that couldn't repaired, that could not be. We're learning a lot right now, as well as the just the requirements and the restrictions. So we didn't move in knowing really any of this. We wanted to keep it streamlined as possible, and whether there's a boat on the dock or not, a hoist system, it doesn't really add anything when the boat is on the dock. It's still hidden. It's not this big thing on the outside of this canopy. It's going up between and just lifts the boat up, and that's about it.
said remove the eyesore that was there, legs
Right.
sticking out of the water.
And I wouldn't call it an eyesore. I would call it just having degraded metal sitting on a lake.
Right.
Less, even though it can act as a great spot for fishing habitat, just having that in there, getting the rust out of the water. That's kind of where we're going with it.
True. Also, I would like the availability of not having it on a mooring, because I would like to do some volunteer work here with the people of the lake to keep the lake clean and do some of the work that I did in Wisconsin. So that's a possibility, which makes it a lot easier than trying to get out to a mooring and retrieve the boat to go do the work.
That on the mooring, it would then be swinging almost on top of the mooring next to us. They have a boat that size and just a bigger boat. It's not real big, but a ski boat, a smaller ski boat, or a smaller runabout would work great on our grandfathered mooring, but I wouldn't recommend putting a pontoon on one of them.
Okay.
Close quarters. Anyway.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate your input tonight. Clarification. Council. Richard.
So we can further the discussion. I'm going to move to deny WLV 19, is that the right one?
Dash W25.
725. With the findings of fact developed by the Whitefish Lake Committee.
And I'll just clarify that it's WLV 19-W25. Is there a second to the motion to deny?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Fury. Discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate the conundrum, but I also know that we take the recommendations of the Whitefish Lakeshore Protection Committee very, very seriously. And normally, these things would almost fall into the consent agenda, but since the 4-1 vote to deny coming out of committee, that sways, takes a lot of weight with me. And I realize that you didn't understand the full impact of the Lakeshore regulations at the time of purchase. But on the other hand, I think we have a responsibility, both as a council and as a community, to do what we can to protect the Lakeshore, and that's the reasons for my motion to deny.
Thank you, Richard. Further discussion. Andy.
Yeah, I'll make a couple comments. I live on the lake directly across from you. I have a dock, a shore station, all of those things. I understand how it all works. And I'm going to have to vote for Richard's motion for the basic reason is I understand your circumstance and I get what the problem is, but one of the things when we deal with a variance, particularly for a zoning variance, you need to meet all of the criteria, not 5 out of 7 or not 3 out of 7 and I quite frankly have a very difficult time seeing how we meet any of the 4 criteria here. We could maybe argue in some ways that you do, but for the most part, we don't. The mayor made a very good point that we have not ever in recent memory, that's probably 20 years, granted a variance for setback. And because of that, I really have to say I'm going to have to vote for Richard's motion. And I get that, yeah, it's just going to come up from underneath, and I know my shore station sits there under the water for the most part, and it doesn't have a canopy, the same thing, but it is there. And it does provide a navigational hazard when my boat's not there for my neighbors when they come in and out. And they had less than a 25-foot setback, and they didn't see it in the dark coming in, and my boat wasn't there, it would be a problem. So I don't really think that I can vote for an approval.
Thank you, Andy. Further comments on the motion? Frank.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate it, and I clearly, I don't have either you or Andy's history with this, but if I'm understanding this correctly, since this does not have a canopy, this is going to be a lift system that's going to lift the boat from the inside, so there'll be no external, nothing wider or more apparent than the boat itself. And the boat itself could be parked in that very position without a lift. So in terms of the expansion into what I'll call a sight line or any other thing remains the same, whether we have a lift system there to prevent the boat from dragging itself down the shoreline with the winds and everything else. Are we cutting our nose off to spite our face? I mean, this is a better solution for dealing with this boat than putting it on a whip system for the neighbors and probably for the lake. That's my conundrum here. I've got a real, okay, I understand the precedent and I appreciate it, but this is a better solution than what they could otherwise do without permission. And how many times on this council have we been here saying, well, yeah, it's a variance, or it's a CUP, or it's a public or a plan unit development, and this is better than this is a better solution for this property than it would be if it was a condition or what they could do by right. We've made exceptions for that very reason. My question, again, I don't have the history, I don't understand the sizes of necessarily this, but this sounds like a much more elegant solution to the problem of dealing with a boat that could otherwise be there by just simply putting in that configuration. I mean, it's like, and that's my question.
Further discussion or comments on the motion for denial? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And the motion fails on a 4-2 vote with Councilor Hennon, Williams, Sweeney, and Hartman voting in opposition. So we'll need another motion to what I assume will be the opposite outcome. Frank.
If I can get to Bailey's crisp language.
It's on page.
170.
Sorry, Frank.
170,
You're on, it's page 171 of the packet.
All right. With deference to our Lakeshore Committee, which I, again, tend to approve and follow their recommendations every time, I would move to approve WLV 19-W25 with proposed findings of fact for approval and the proposed 11 conditions of approval as recommended by staff in the staff report dated September 24th, 2019. Now.
Hold on, Frank, let's wait for a second to the motion. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Frank.
Bailey, will this, my concern is, this is an elegant, I believe this is an elegant solution to a specific problem. how do we make it a continued elegant solution to a specific problem should this property trade hands?
Well, the variance runs with the land.
Property.
So it runs with the property, it doesn't run with the property owner. So the variance would stay with that. So a new owner would be able to, they'd have to comply with this permit, the conditions that are set for, I mean, that they never go away. So it would have to be the same. So say, I mean, I don't think they could have a bigger boat, but say somebody wanted to make a bigger, even a bigger boat and reduce the setback to say 5 feet, they would have to come back and get a new application or get a new variance approved to reduce the setback even further. But otherwise, this runs with the land itself, just like a zoning one does.
Thank you. All right. I can live with that.
Further comments? I had a question, Bailey, or maybe this is for the applicant. Is there any reason why the boat rail system is not being removed?
No, I don't think it's ever been a requirement of it. Surprisingly, when they did the boathouse reduction, it wasn't a requirement. I don't know if it's just been like it was there and then nobody knew it was down there, or but it wasn't a requirement of the other one.
Can we require the removal? It's no longer in use. It's
No, not
no,
the
boat.
boathouse.
No,
the
I
rail
understand that. The
system.
boat rail system,
The
the tracks.
tracks.
Is there any
Yeah.
reason that you would not be in favor of a condition that would require removal? Okay. Okay. I was just curious.
I would clearly entertain a friendly amendment to include that.
Please do. Or someone.
I would move to amend my motion to require as part and parcel of the 11 conditions that the existing rail system be completely removed from the lake bed.
And that would be condition number 12, Bailey?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would second the friendly amendment for condition number 12.
Thank you, Katie. We will vote on the friendly amendment to add condition number 12 requiring the removal of the remaining boat rail system. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Frank? Andy? Yes. Okay, and that vote is unanimous. Michelle, which does bring us back to the original motion with added condition number 12, which is for approval of the minor variance to side setbacks. Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And the motion does carry on a 4-2 vote with councilors Fury and Hildner voting in opposition. Thanks for coming tonight. Clear on the motion? Okay. You bet. Thanks, Bailey. Thanks, Corey. Yep. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Catherine. We're going to go ahead and take just about a 4-minute, 5-minute break here, if that's okay with the council. Okay, we're going to reconvene, and we last left off on item 7A, so we'll move on to item 7B, and we'll hear from Dave on a consideration and direction we provided to staff to bring us back revised permit standards regarding the WB2, which is our secondary business district. Dave.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So yeah, at the last council meeting, you guys directed us to hold something on our public hearings or in our information from the planning and building director to discuss the WB2 zoning district and hotels, conditional use permit standards. And so I provided you some different options. Currently, hotels and motels and other hospitality entertainment uses are permitted use in the WB2. We also have a bulk and scale standard of buildings that are 15,000 square feet or greater require a conditional use permit within that district. And of course, that is our highway district that's sort of geared towards larger types of development. There's traditional along highways. I provided some information of some of the existing buildings in that district just to give you some reference of the different square footages. So two of the options that you guys could look to address this. One, if the concern's primarily with hotels and their proliferation, it could be moved from the permitted uses to the conditional uses of that zoning district with a zoning text amendment. That could be justified due to the impacts of hotels. They obviously put a large impact to our water supply with the number of additional services with the number of rooms that are usually required with hotels. They also have impact on our affordable housing with the number of service workers that hotels require in order to function. So there's some different impacts that could justify that being a conditional use. Just adding that to the conditional use rather than reducing the conditional use permit threshold for bulk and scale from say 15,000 down to 10,000 square feet would just address the hotels without impacting other businesses. There's quite a few other types of businesses that have buildings or would need buildings that are in that large range that are currently permitted uses in that zoning district. And of course, if a conditional use permit is required, then if anybody does an addition onto something that requires a conditional use, then they have to come back for a new conditional use permit. So there are some impacts if you do reduce the standard to 10,000 square feet. But so it would basically, the entertainment uses is one of the uses in there, and that's kind of tied in there, so we'd have to pull that apart, but we could just easily move hotels from the permitted uses to the conditional uses. Some of the disadvantages of that, again, any additions to a hotel would have to get a conditional use permit. Also, if they are taken out of the WB2 and moved into the conditional uses, there's still a permitted use downtown in the B3, so that might push hotels into the downtown because it's a permitted use there currently. So that might be something to consider. As far as the other option of reducing the threshold from 15,000 to 10,000 square feet, generally, again, that would apply to all development happening in the B2 zoning district. So obviously give you guys an opportunity to review any new development that happens down there, since that is the district that allows the largest types of development like grocery stores, lumber yards, theaters, hospitals, all those things would probably end up coming before you guys when they came in for development. The flip side of that is that, you know, can be looked at as an impediment for developers if they have to go through a discretionary process. So that could be definitely a concern in some ways. And also with our Highway 93 South corridor plan that we're working on, some of the stuff that would come out of the stuff that we did with our economic development consultant was looking at things like moving the light industrial, light manufacturing uses out of the conditional uses into the permitted uses in that zoning district because that has the most available land. And, you know, again, because it's a conditional use requirement, it'd be an impediment. So even if we did that, but then we reduced the standard to 10,000 square feet, they may still have to come in for a conditional use permit. So just something to think about in that regard. So that's another option. The third option would be just to, you know, allow the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan Steering Committee to look at this option and try to address that in the plan. But that is a several months off, and so if you guys are feeling like something that you want to address right away, then we can certainly have something before the planning board at their November meeting, which would come to you guys in December. Depending on whether or not you have a second meeting in December, it might not be till February when it gets adopted. And I don't know if you guys wanted to also discuss gas stations or service stations and convenience stores, but that's something that we could also address with a code amendment that we brought forward. So I'm open to questions, kind of laid this stuff out for you guys, obviously. Just looking for some direction from you guys on how you want to approach this, or if you want to approach it.
Who would like to start? Otherwise, I will. Kind of see a blending of options here, just for the council to think about. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I think we've hashed through this in our work session a couple months ago, and then more recently at our last meeting. I don't think this needs to be kicked down to the 93 South Steering Committee, because quite frankly, I think we need to be timely with these zoning text amendments, and the sooner we can get these through the planning board and back in front of us, I think the better. My suggestion for your consideration is, regardless of use, that we require all buildings equal to or greater than 10,000 square feet be required to come in for a conditional use permit. Secondly, I believe all hotel and hospitality uses, regardless of size, whether they're 6,000, 8,000, 15,000, should require a conditional use permit. And then I would ask Dave about, or I would just throw out the suggestion that we also consider moving automotive service stations from the permitted category in the WB2 to conditional use in the WB2. Richard. And of course, I'd like Dave's and Angie's input on those suggestions if we get some momentum here from the council. Richard.
What the mayor said, I agree with you. I think that speed is of the essence here. And not that we need to be so quick to make a terrible mistake, but I think that given the rapidity of some of the development that is perhaps on the horizon and the importance of the corridor, that we need to be, in this case, proactive. And I think your blending idea is, I really like the way you articulated it, John.
Thanks, Richard. Further comments from the council? We will need direction at some point. Andy.
Yeah, question for Angie, Dave, whoever. Could we also look at total square footage of paved area? My concern is if we look at just building size, I'm looking at Whitefish Marine, not that they paved, mind you, but I look at the amount of cleared area there and what would be potentially paved, and I look at the size of the building. The building's not very big, but it's one big ugly eyesore. I'm sorry, Whitefish Marine, but it is. And everybody that goes by it will say that same darn thing. So can we look at paved area as part of
Yeah, impervious surface is something that, you know, a lot of communities do regulate. I mean, that's something that we could look at in those areas.
I would argue that we should look at amount of paved area, because I mean, I think you could put in a tiny little building and have acres of asphalt and, you know.
But one concern of that is it's directly related to our parking requirements, the amount of paved area generally. Some uses require a ton of parking, and so
Correct.
for requiring the parking for that, I mean, how do we,
Correct.
you know, we have to look at
But at
both
least
sides of that.
we're looking at it through a conditioned use, and we're maybe making the landscaping requirements a little more stringent or screening or something, so, I mean, I'd like to see that considered also.
And one other thing is with our new non-residential building requirements, we do require parking lots to be behind the buildings rather than along the highway, so they're gonna be, future ones would be screened in that sense from being, you know, visible along the highway.
Okay. Angie, I saw you had your hand up.
I did. One thing that actually Dana and Dave and I talked a little bit about too is uses that require a large canopy. Gas stations, I mean, you know, if you look at the gas station besides Safeway, we don't consider that as part of the, I guess, the building footprint, even though I guess in my view, it does have quite a big visual impact. You know, and again, looking at gas stations, the gas station itself might be fairly small, but when you put all those canopies that, you know, are not necessarily required, but all of them have them, you know, that is one thing too that I think creates a lot of visual impact that we're maybe not taking into consideration.
Good point.
Will we be picking that up with the some measure of managing impervious, conditional use based on the number of impervious surfaces that are presented. In other words, whether it's parking lot or canopies or whatever, I mean, is that the better way to approach this problem as opposed to just parking lots or just talk about impermeable surfaces?
Yeah, and that could very well be, Frank. It was just something that
No, I think it's a great, that's a
came
great.
to Dana and I's attention when we were actually looking at some different gas stations throughout the valley, and at least what they're reporting, you know, the square footage on the state, you know, the actual building itself might be, you know, minimal, or, you know, a large building, but, you know, if you're not counting the canopy, and the canopy is a huge, I think, visual impact.
Yeah, I would think just include canopy and square footage of the building. Square footage of the canopy is,
Right there.
just because it doesn't have walls doesn't mean it's not a building.
It's per, the way we look at it, the definition of footprint is per building, so each individual building, unless they're attached to one another, would be looked at separately. So some types of uses have accessory buildings, but, you know, the main building, whatever the biggest building is, typically you know, but if somebody adds you know, detached shed outside their building, but they're already over 15,000 square foot, we don't require them to come in for a conditional use permit unless they're adding on to their main building. It's just the way the regulations are written, based on footprint of the principal building.
Total area under roof or canopy.
Period. Or parking lot. I mean, I think that's a better way to look at it, and a more comprehensive way to get deal with what we're dealing with.
I'm anxious to get something before the planning board.
Yeah, my question of staff, first of all, I assume we probably have some consensus here amongst these items. Clearly don't want to delay this. I think we've discussed this enough. Did you see any problems with the suggestions that I made regarding?
Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. I mean, if we were gonna add an impervious surface requirement, that might take a little longer.
Let me get to that in a second
put
here.
together, but,
So we've discussed the threshold for a CUP for all buildings regardless of use to 10,000 square feet, requiring all hotel and hospitality uses irregardless of footprint. And then thirdly, moving automotive service stations from the permitted to conditional use category in the B2. Is that something you can run with and present?
Absolutely.
At the
We can
next
have that.
planning board for consideration?
It's an easy change that we can have on the November planning board meeting. Yep.
Okay, so let's move ahead with that, assuming we have consensus, showing of hands, just for the record. Okay, then secondly, to the other issues or desires that were made regarding square footage of impervious / paved area, as well as canopy coverage as a component of the building footprint. Is that enough direction for you to run with to get that to the planning board as well, or is that something we would need
I
to?
mean, some of that maybe, I have to research what other communities are doing
Sure.
with regard to that and how that plays in. I mean, you know, if we're already dropping the threshold to 10,000 square feet, are we still gonna cover what we need? But that's something that we could maybe pull some different ideas together and have a work session with the council to talk about that, if that.
Okay,
works for you
understand
guys.
that this
It's
kind
just a
of,
little more work to get it on the fast track.
sure,
but-
likely came unexpectedly. Understand if you need more time to do some research. Is that okay with the council if we discuss that in more detail during a work session?
Yes,
Andy? Okay,
sooner rather than later.
sooner rather than later.
I don't want this to be next year.
Agree. And so I assume with that schedule, assuming the planning board doesn't table, postpone, we'll probably see those first three text amendments in front of us at the first meeting in December. Is that correct?
Yep, and then it would take a second hearing, and then it doesn't go into effect for 30 days, so.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Get her done.
Further comment on this item before we move on? Not seeing any. We will turn to our interim city manager and finance director, Dana. Item 8A, you have Dana's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Dana, anything additional to report on?
Just a couple things. This actually occurred prior to Monday, the 30th, but I just wanted to thank our fire department for their great response to the Chalmambo fire, and our police department for handling the traffic control, and Public Works for securing water to the site. A lot of other agencies also responded, but I think it was a really great turnout, something that we can only hope happens in the future when those fires occur. Joe and I also met with North Valley Hospital leadership, and we are working with them, trying to come up with a contract for our interfacility transfers. They do have a contract with Evergreen Fire Department, but that's kind of a little more history on that. They actually had an agreement with KRMC when KRMC and North Valley became affiliated. There was connections there for them to also come forward with a contract, but we are still working on that because it is a significant source of revenue for our fire department. And then finally, I've reached out to Homeward about the snow lot, and I really hope that I'll have an update for you at the next meeting. So that's all.
Great, Dana. I didn't hear this, but I was aware that there was a fire at Mambo Italiano, but what was the extent of damage?
Fire started in the wall up behind the vent stack, and it got the vent stack going, so it was pretty impressive when I first showed up, but it tended to be a fire in the wall. So they're working pretty hard to try to be open by the new year. They kept telling me December. I'm thinking January.
Okay, but no one was injured, of course.
Nobody was injured.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Dana. We'll move on to item 9A, which is a consideration of appointing Charles Christ to the Whitefish Housing Authority as a resident member. His term would end December 31st, 2020, and this comes to us as a recommendation from the Whitefish Housing Authority, Lori Collins in particular. Apparently, this is my appointment. I will need council ratification, so I would motion to appoint Charles Christ to the Whitefish Housing Authority with the term ending December 31, 2020 as the resident member, and just a showing of hands for ratification from the council. And that's approved. Thanks, Michelle. And thanks, Lori. As we typically do, we have on our last agenda item consideration of canceling the second meeting in December, which would be December 16th, 2019, and I just need a simple motion and a vote on that to cancel the December 16 meeting.
Mr.
I
Mayor.
would throw out, just for your consideration, given what we just tasked our planning staff to do, that perhaps we would like to see a second reading on the zoning text amendments if the planning board acts and makes a recommendation to this body. If they don't, if they postpone, table for whatever reason, there's probably not the need to have this meeting, but in the event that they do, and I kind of have some faith that they probably will, why don't we hold that meeting on our schedule for now?
I would so move, and Mr. Mayor, I think that if we, to the extent we can do so, and we're going to have a meeting, let's just have the meeting contingent on that being our only agenda item.
Okay, or an agenda item.
Or as an, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
that's fair enough. Is that okay with you, Dana?
That's fine.
Okay. Great. Thanks, council. We'll start with communications, and I think we'll start with Richard.
Surprise, surprise. Hardly a week goes by that someone doesn't ask me, or I ask myself, about the building at the corner of O'Brien and Second that has the building wrap flapping in the breeze, and the adjoining or the next door neighbor, the senior center. And I would love to know what's going on. And I think the public would too.
Staff, who's prepared to answer that question? Dave? Or Dana?
No, I haven't heard any update. I know it was in litigation for a long time. You know, the engineer basically had to take culpability, and the insurance companies got involved, and so they, you know, when that happens, everything comes to a halt. But I was told that things were gonna start moving on it again, but I don't know what the dates are.
Okay.
So I've also heard the same, but I've also heard that the community center has requested of Whitefish Housing Authority to use their common area, break area, for their activities. So there is work being done actually on the community center, on the building that was damaged. So there is movement on fixing that property. And I've also heard that they had contractors actually on the site of the newer building that you referenced.
I'd love to have confirmation on all of those things, because the only movement I see is the building wrap in the breeze.
I'll share what I know, and it may be not entirely accurate, but of course, the problem that transpired at the site was the geotechnical investigation, or the geotech design and recommendations failed to account for the weight of the actual structural fill that was placed below the building and only accounted for the actual weight and bearing load of the structure. So that was the apparent shortcoming of that study. Regardless of what happened legally, I do know that there is a solution in place or moving forward that's going to include deep pilings under the foundation slab, upwards of, I heard, a couple 100 feet down to a solid, bedrock, surface, and apparently that is moving forward, and I believe there was up to 4 to 6 inches of settling on one end of the structure. So I believe there's a solution forthcoming. I don't think anyone's happy about the Tyvek flapping in the wind, but hopefully we'll see some movement on this sooner than later. Anything further, Richard?
That's it for tonight.
All right. Andy?
Yeah, just a couple of things. It came up in our parking meeting workshop recently about people on Central Avenue essentially occupying parking spots 24/7 for the entire summer season while they're working on their buildings. Do we have some kind of regulation to deal with that? We're going to be dealing with it across the street eventually when that happens. And I realize the need to mobilize and get in and out, but we do have time limits on our parking downtown, and I don't understand why those guys get completely occupied. I mean, they've been there all summer. I mean, some of those things haven't even moved, and that, I don't know, it's unsightly, and I'm not trying to discourage or make their job more difficult, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that those are taxpayer paid for parking spots that are being utilized for a private construction project.
Yeah, we've historically issued encroachment permits for contractors working on Central Avenue to occupy the spaces in front of the project that they're building. There's a number of recommendations in the parking study, and that's one of the things that's going to come out of that report is a revised way to manage those encroachments, time limits, perhaps total number of permits that any one contractor could have at any given time, as well as a cost. Right now, it's I think a $25 permit fee. One parking ticket could be as much as $25. So that will be addressed, I'm optimistic, before next season.
Good. And then along the construction-related notes, as I go down Dakota all the time, I'm constantly reminded of the fact that we do actually have tracking pad requirements for construction sites, and the afterthought of the one that was put in on the project on Dakota there, and the amount of mud that was tracked up and down Dakota in both directions, which fortunately we've had a pretty wet summer and it's been rained off a number of times, but that's something that building department may want to make sure they're a little more diligent on, because that place was a mess several times this summer. And it was, I mean, they threw out a little strip of rock about that big, and I'm sorry, that's not a tracking pad. That's not cleaning the wheels off of anything before it hits the street, so.
Thanks, Andy. Ryan?
No comment.
Thanks, Ryan. Katie?
One comment I forgot to mention during my LLAC board report that Whitefish Legacy Partners reported that Lion Mountain had over 45,000 visits in the past year. They started doing a trail count, so people are using it. Everyone's aware of it, and people like to go outside.
Thanks, Katie. Frank?
I want to thank Richard for bringing up the building at O'Brien and Second Street. I look at it every day.
Literally, from your window.
Literally from my window. I guess the other, as long as we're on construction projects gone awry, is there anything that can be reported at this point with respect to the some people called it a historic building that was at the corner of Lupfer and Second Street that was so badly damaged it could not be transported or moved? Do we know anything that can be reported at this point, Bridger?
No, there hasn't been much information obtained from that. It's still ongoing, and we'll follow up with any leads or any other information we have, but at this point, it's pretty stale.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Melissa?
No comment.
I only have one comment. I don't know why this popped into my brain today when I was reviewing the packet. Andy, what's the status of our tourism sustainability master plan process?
They met on Monday, and I was not able to attend unfortunately, because I was on puppy duty without my extra puppy sitter. So Michelle can probably update us on that, being a member of that committee. Or Craig too, but.
So we actually are going to be holding a public open house. We can't quite decide if we want to call it open house or a public meeting on the 22nd of October here in the chambers, in the lobby area, from 5:30 or 6 to 8, I believe. But a flyer will be going out, information will be going out for that. We plan on holding a public a work session in January, and then approval of the plan in February.
Okay,
So we're wrapping it up.
great, nice job,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thanks to the consultants of Applied Communications and Roach. I can't remember the other consultant, but thanks to them.
Doing a good job.
They're doing a really good, they're doing a really good job.
Good to hear. They served us well in the Wisconsin study as well. And then just so the council can start thinking about the next meeting, and I can as well, Dana, what are our work session items for next meeting?
So for next meeting, you have your city attorney's performance eval. You also have an update, water, wastewater infrastructure project update from Craig, and then we'll have 30 minutes for the wrap-up of the Whitefish Housing Authority's review of, I would say we're now into the rental deed restriction and rental portion of their plan. So it'll be a busy work session, so we'll have to start at 5:30, no later, as long as you're comfortable with half an hour to complete Angie's performance eval, which sounds like that was probably the case last year. It was pretty fast. So.
We can do that.
Okay.
Thanks, Dana. Anything further from staff tonight? How about council? We're adjourned. Thanks.